In 1878, on a dying Montana ranch where daughters were taught their only value was beauty, 21-year-old Clara Hale spent her life invisible. The strong daughter nobody wanted, watching her delicate sister get groomed for a rich marriage that would save their family from ruin. Then a wealthy rancher's son arrived to claim his bride, looked past the beautiful girl everyone expected him to choose, and pointed at Clara instead. Her father called her worthless. Her sister screamed, and Clara made the most dangerous choice of her life. She climbed onto a stranger's horse and rode away from everything, knowing she could never come back. If you want to see how the forgotten daughter became Montana's most powerful woman, stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The ranch was dying, and everyone knew it. Clara Hale drove the fence post into frozen ground with shoulders that burned and hands wrapped in bloody rags. February wind cut across the Montana grassland like a blade, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The fence line stretched another quarter-mile, and if the cattle got through again tonight, her father would find someone to blame. It would be her. It was always her. "Clara, Clara, where are you?" Her mother's voice carried thin and sharp across the fields. Clara straightened, her spine cracking, and wiped sweat from her face with the back of one filthy glove. The main house sat 300 yards behind her, its paint peeling, its porch sagging, its windows dark except for the parlor where her sister Vivian would be sitting in her good dress, waiting, always waiting. Clara grabbed the post driver and started back toward the barn, her boots crunching through ice-crusted mud. She was almost there when her mother appeared in the doorway, face pinched with cold and something sharper. "What are you doing out here? I've been calling for 20 minutes. "Fixing the fence on the north pasture." The wire snapped again. "Well, leave it. Come inside and clean yourself up. We have company coming." Clara stopped walking. "What company?" Her mother's mouth tightened. "Mr. Mercer is bringing his son. They'll be here within the hour." The name hit Clara like a fist. Mercer, the richest ranching family in Montana Territory, maybe in the whole damn West. They owned land from the Yellowstone River to the mountain passes, ran cattle by the thousands, had more money than Clara's family would see in 10 generations. And they were coming here. "Why?" Clara asked. "You know why?" Her mother's voice dropped. "Vivian is 20. We can't wait any longer. Your father has debts that—" She stopped herself, glancing toward the house. "Just come inside and make yourself presentable. Stay in the kitchen. Don't embarrass us." Clara should have been used to it by now, should have stopped feeling the sting. But something about the way her mother said, "Don't embarrass us," like Clara was a stain they couldn't scrub out, made her chest go tight. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. Her mother turned and hurried back toward the house, skirts swishing. Clara followed more slowly, the post driver heavy in her hand. When she reached the barn, she hung it on its peg and stood there for a moment in the dusty quiet, listening to the horses shift in their stalls. She was 21 years old, strong as any man on the ranch, could birth a calf, break a horse, mend a roof, shoot straight. She'd kept this place alive for the last 3 years while her father drank himself stupid and her mother pretended everything was fine and her sister Vivian practiced being beautiful. And still, she was the daughter they hid in the kitchen. Clara stripped off her work gloves and headed toward the house. Inside, the transformation was already underway. Her mother had lit every lamp in the parlor, polished the furniture until it gleamed, laid out their best tea set, the one with only 2 chipped cups. Vivian sat on the settee in a pale blue dress that made her look like something out of a painting. Blonde hair pinned up soft, skin like cream, hands folded in her lap. Their father stood by the window watching the road. He was a tall man, gone gray and hard in the shoulders, with a face that used to be handsome before whiskey and failure carved it down to bone. He didn't look at Clara when she came in. "Get washed," he said, "and stay out of sight unless you're serving." Clara didn't answer. She went to the kitchen, pumped water into the basin, and scrubbed her hands until the skin was raw. Her face in the cracked mirror above the sink looked like a stranger's, sunburned, wind-chapped. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid and hung in tangles around her face. She tried to smooth it down, then gave up. It didn't matter what she looked like. She wasn't the daughter anyone came to see. The sound of hooves on the drive sent her mother into a flurry of last-minute adjustments. Clara watched from the kitchen doorway as Vivian stood, smoothed her skirts, and arranged her face into a soft, sweet smile. Their father straightened his vest. Their mother checked the tea set one more time. And then the knock came. Her father opened the door. Two men stood on the porch. The first was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a coat that probably cost more than the Hale Ranch made in a year. His face was all sharp angles and cold eyes that swept over the shabby parlor like he was calculating its worth and finding it wanting. The second man was younger, mid-20s maybe, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so damn serious. He wore work clothes, good ones, well-made, but still work clothes, and his hands were calloused when he pulled off his gloves. "Mr. Hale," the older man said. His voice was clipped, Eastern educated, a voice used to being obeyed. "I'm Victor Mercer. This is my son, Colton." Clara's father stepped aside, gesturing them in with a hand that shook just slightly. "Mr. Mercer, it's an honor. Please, come in, come in." They entered. Victor Mercer's gaze went straight to Vivian, who dipped into a perfect curtsy. Clara saw the calculation in his eyes, the assessment, the approval. Vivian was everything a man like him would want for his son. Delicate, refined, decorative. But Colton wasn't looking at Vivian. He was looking at Clara. She froze in the kitchen doorway, still in her work shirt and dirt-stained trousers, her hands red and raw, her hair a mess. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, something Clara couldn't name. Not attraction exactly, more like recognition, like he saw her. "My daughter Vivian," Clara's father was saying, his voice too loud, too eager. "She's been looking forward to meeting you." Vivian smiled. "Mr. Mercer, it's a pleasure." Victor nodded. "Charming." He glanced at Colton. "Well?" But Colton was still looking at Clara. "Who's that?" he asked. The parlor went silent. Clara's mother stepped forward quickly. "That's Clara, our other daughter. She helps with the ranch work. Clara, bring the tea." It wasn't a request. Clara moved mechanically, going to the stove where the kettle sat ready, pouring hot water into the pot. Her hands were steady, even though her heart was hammering. She arranged cups on the tray, added cream and sugar, and carried it all into the parlor. Colton was sitting now, but his eyes followed her across the room. She set the tray down on the low table, poured tea into 4 cups with practiced efficiency, and started to retreat. "Wait," Colton said. Clara stopped. "What's your name again?" "Clara." Her voice came out rougher than she meant it to. "Clara Hale. How old are you?" 21. "You work the ranch?" "Yes." "What do you do?" The question was strange, pointed. Clara glanced at her father, whose face had gone tight with warning, then back at Colton. "Whatever needs doing," she said carefully. "Fences, livestock, buildings. Calving season just started, so mostly that." Colton leaned forward slightly. "You handle the calving yourself?" "Yes." "At night? In this cold?" "The calves don't wait for warm weather." Something flickered in his expression, something that might have been respect. "No?" he said quietly. "I suppose they don't." Victor cleared his throat. "Colton, Miss Vivian was telling me about her piano playing. Perhaps she could perform for us." But Colton didn't look away from Clara. "Do you ride?" he asked. "Yes." "Well?" "Well enough." "Can you rope?" "Yes." "Shoot?" "Yes." "Break a horse?" Clara's father made a strangled sound. "Mr. Mercer, I apologize for my daughters." "I'm not talking to you," Colton said, his voice flat. He kept his eyes on Clara. "Can you?" "Yes," Clara said. "I can." Colton sat back, something settling in his face like a decision made. He looked at his father. "I want this one." The room exploded. Vivian gasped. Clara's mother made a choking sound. Her father lurched to his feet, face flushing dark red. "What?" Victor Mercer's expression didn't change. "Colton, this one," Colton repeated. He stood, still looking at Clara. "Not the pretty one. Her." Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The world had tilted sideways, and she couldn't find her footing. "Absolutely not," her father said, his voice shaking with rage. "Vivian is the daughter we agreed." "I don't remember agreeing to anything," Colton said calmly. "You invited us here to meet your daughters. I've met them. I've made my choice." "She's not," She's close to hatred. She's worthless. She's got no manners, no education, no... She's got a spine, Colton cut him off. That's more than I can say for most people. Vivian started crying, delicate, pretty tears that slid down her perfect face. Papa, be quiet, their father snapped. He turned on Clara, his face twisted. This is your doing. You've put ideas in his head somehow. I haven't done anything, Clara said, her voice coming out stronger than she felt. I didn't even know you were coming until an hour ago. Liar, her father took a step toward her. You've ruined everything, everything. Do you understand what you've done? I haven't done anything, Clara repeated. Victor Mercer stood. His presence filled the room like cold water. Mr. Hale, control yourself. But Clara's father was past control. Years of failure and shame and whiskey had carved something mean and desperate into him, and now it was pouring out. You want her? He spat at Colton. Take her. She's not worth the food she eats, breaks her back working this ranch like a man and can't even act like a proper woman. You think she'll make you a good wife? She'll embarrass you at every turn. She's got no grace, no beauty, nothing. Papa, stop, Vivian whispered. And if you take her out of here, you better keep her, because she's not coming back. You hear me? He jabbed a finger at Clara, his hand shaking. You walk out that door with him. You're dead to this family. Dead. I'll burn your name out of the Bible. You'll have nothing. You understand? The room went silent again. Clara stood there with her father's words ringing in her ears, with her mother's stricken face, and her sister's tears, and Victor Mercer's cold assessment, and Colton's steady gaze all pressing in on her like a vice. She should be terrified, should be begging, should be trying to smooth this over, to make herself small and invisible again, to let Vivian have what was always meant to be hers. But something in Clara's chest had cracked open, and all the years of swallowing insults and biting her tongue and pretending she didn't hear the cruel things they said about her when they thought she was out of earshot, all of it came pouring out in a single crystalline moment of clarity. She was done. All right, Clara said quietly. Her father blinked. What? I said, all right. Clara looked at Colton. You want me to come with you? Yes, Colton said. Why? The question seemed to surprise him. He considered it for a moment, then said, because you're real. Everything else I've seen today is performance. You're the only real thing in this room. It wasn't a declaration of love. Wasn't even particularly romantic, but it was honest, and Clara had been starving for honesty her whole life. Then I'll come, she said. Her mother made a broken sound. Clara, you can't. Mrs. Hale, Victor Mercer said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Your husband has made his position clear. The girl has accepted my son's proposal. We'll make the arrangements. There are no arrangements to make, Clara's father snarled. She leaves now. She leaves with nothing. No dowry, no trousseau. Nothing. You hear me? Nothing. We don't need your money, Colton said. Good. Her father grabbed Clara's arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Then get out. Get out of my house. You're no daughter of mine. He shoved her toward the door. Clara stumbled, caught herself, and straightened. She looked at her mother, who had turned her face away, at Vivian, who was sobbing into her hands, at her father, whose face was mottled with rage and shame. Goodbye, Clara said. Nobody answered. She walked to the door. Colton followed. Victor Mercer paused on the threshold and looked back at Clara's father with something that might have been contempt. You're a fool, he said quietly. You had a daughter worth keeping, and you threw her away. That will haunt you. Then he left too. Outside, the February wind hit Clara like a fist. She had no coat, no money, no belongings except the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she'd just burned her entire life to the ground. Colton walked to where the horses were tied and swung up onto a big bay gelding. He looked down at Clara. You can ride behind me, or take your father's mare. Clara glanced back at the house. Her father's mare was in the barn. Taking her would be theft, technically, but Clara was already disowned, already dead to them. I'll take the mare, she said. She went to the barn, saddled the horse with hands that didn't shake, and led her out. Colton and Victor were waiting. Clara mounted, feeling the familiar comfort of a horse beneath her, and gathered the reins. You're sure about this? Victor Mercer asked. He was looking at her like she was a problem to be solved. No, Clara said honestly, but I'm sure about what I'm leaving. Something that might have been approval flickered across Victor's face. Fair enough. He spurred his horse forward. Colton followed. Clara took one last look at the ranch, the sagging porch, the broken fence line, the fields she'd bled for, and then she turned her horse's head and rode away. She didn't look back. They rode for 2 hours through country Clara knew by heart, past the Miller Ranch, past the creek where she used to fish as a child, past the road that led to town. The sun was setting by the time they turned onto Mercer land, and Clara felt it like crossing a border into foreign territory. The land changed. Fences were straight and strong. Cattle were fat and healthy. Buildings were new and well-maintained. And as they rode deeper into Mercer territory, Clara began to see just how vast it really was. Miles of it, thousands of acres stretching from the valley floor up into the foothills, pastures and timber and water rights and everything a ranching empire needed to survive. "How much land do you have?" Clara asked. "Enough," Victor said. That wasn't an answer, but Clara didn't push. She was too busy trying to process what she'd done. An hour ago, she'd been fixing a fence. Now she was riding toward a marriage with a man she'd known for 20 minutes, leaving behind the only family she'd ever had. The smart thing would be to panic. But Clara had stopped doing the smart thing the moment she agreed to leave. The main house came into view as full dark settled over the valley. It was huge, 2 stories, white clapboard, a wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Lamplight glowed in the windows. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. It looked solid and permanent in a way the Hale Ranch had never been. They dismounted in front of the barn. A ranch hand appeared immediately to take the horses. A young Mexican man who nodded to Victor and eyed Clara with open curiosity. "Carlos, take care of the mare," Victor said. "She's Miss Hale's now." "Yes, sir." Carlos took the reins and led all 3 horses toward the barn. Victor turned to Clara. "You'll stay in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss arrangements." "Arrangements?" Clara asked. "The marriage, the settlement, your role here." His eyes were cold and assessing. "My son may have chosen you, but you'll need to prove you can handle being a Mercer. This isn't a charity house." "I didn't ask for charity." "Good. You won't get any." Victor walked toward the house. Colton lingered, looking at Clara in the darkness. "He's hard," he said quietly, "but he's not cruel. Not like your father." Clara's throat tightened. "You don't know my father." "I know men like him. Men who break things when they're scared." Colton's voice was matter-of-fact. "Are you all right?" The question surprised her. "I don't know." That's honest. They stood there in the cold, 2 strangers who'd just upended their lives, and Clara realized she didn't even know what color his eyes were. Couldn't see his face clearly in the dark. "Why did you choose me?" she asked. "Really?" Colton was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been courting women for 3 years. Pretty women, rich women, educated women. Every single one of them smiled and agreed with everything I said and looked at me like I was a prize to be won. And I couldn't stand any of them. And I'm different? You didn't smile once the whole time I was in your house. You looked at me like I was interrupting your work." His voice held something that might have been amusement. "I liked that." "You're insane," Clara said. "Probably." Colton gestured toward the house. "Come on. You're freezing." Clara followed him inside. The house was warm and clean and smelled like wood smoke and coffee. A woman appeared from the kitchen, older, gray-haired, with a face lined by years of hard work. "Mrs. Chen, this is Clara Hale," Colton said. "She'll be staying here. Can you show her to the guest room and find her some clean clothes?" Mrs. Chen's gaze swept over Clara, taking in the work shirt, the dirt-stained trousers, the raw hands, and her expression didn't change. "Yes, sir," she said. "This way, miss." Clara followed her up the stairs and down a hallway to a room that was bigger than the entire parlor back at the Hale Ranch. A bed with a real quilt, a dresser, a window with actual curtains, a wash basin with hot water already waiting. "I'll bring you something to wear," Mrs. Chen said. "Are you hungry?" Clara's stomach twisted. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. "Yes." "I'll bring a tray." Mrs. Chen paused in the doorway. "You're the one who chose to come?" "Yes." "Why?" It was the same question Clara kept asking herself. "Because staying would have killed me." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. That's... Clara stood alone in the guest room, her reflection staring back at her from the dark window. She looked wild, dangerous, like someone who'd just made a choice she couldn't take back. She stripped off her filthy clothes and washed in water that was actually hot, a luxury she'd almost forgotten existed. Mrs. Chen returned with a simple dress, wool stockings, and a tray of food that made Clara's mouth water. Bread, cheese, cold chicken, apples. "Thank you," Clara said. Mrs. Chen set the tray down and looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "Mr. Mercer's a hard man. The son's better, but he's still his father's boy. You understand what you've walked into?" "No," Clara said, "but I'll figure it out." "Will you?" "I don't have a choice." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "We always have a choice, girl. You made yours tonight. Now you have to live with it." She left Clara alone. Clara ate until her stomach hurt, then climbed into the bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The mattress was soft. The room was warm. Outside, she could hear the wind rattling the windows and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the fields. She should sleep. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face twisted with rage, heard him telling her she was worthless, felt the moment when she chose to walk away instead of staying small. Clara had spent 21 years believing she was the wrong daughter, the one who didn't fit, the one nobody wanted. And in a single afternoon, a stranger had looked at her and seen something different. She didn't know if Colton Mercer was right about her, but she was damn sure her father had been wrong. Clara pulled the quilt tighter and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind, and wondered what kind of woman she'd become in this new world she'd chosen. Outside, Montana stretched dark and endless, full of things she didn't know, and battles she hadn't fought yet. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. And that would have to be enough. Clara woke to the sound of men shouting. She bolted upright in the unfamiliar bed, heart hammering, momentarily lost. The room was still dark, but gray light was seeping through the curtains. Dawn, maybe. Or close to it. The shouting continued outside, rough voices, urgent, angry. She threw off the quilt and went to the window. Below, in the yard between the house and the barn, she could see figures moving in the half-light, men on horses, someone holding a torch. The orange flame cast wild shadows across their faces. Clara grabbed the dress Mrs. Chen had left, pulled it on, and ran barefoot down the stairs. The front door was already open. Victor Mercer stood on the porch in his shirt sleeves, a rifle in his hands. Colton was beside him, also armed. The cold hit Clara like a wall, but she pushed through it and stepped outside. "What's happening?" she asked. Victor didn't look at her. "Fire. North pasture." Someone said it deliberately. Clara's stomach dropped. "How bad?" "Bad enough." Victor raised his voice, addressing the men in the yard. "Take every hand who can ride. Get water barrels on the wagons. Move!" The men scattered. Horses were saddled in frantic motion. Clara saw Carlos running toward the barn, saw Mrs. Chen appear with armfuls of blankets, saw the organized chaos of a ranch preparing for disaster. "I can help," Clara said. "You'll stay here," Victor said flatly. "I know how to fight a grass fire." "You know how to fight a fire on a dying ranch with 3 men and a prayer. This is different." Victor finally looked at her, his face hard in the torchlight. "You'll stay here and stay out of the way." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but Colton cut her off. "She can ride with me," he said. Victor's jaw tightened. "Colton?" "She said she can help. Let her help." Colton looked at Clara. "Can you handle a frightened horse in the dark?" "Yes." "Can you take orders without arguing?" Clara wanted to say yes, but she'd never been good at lying. "Probably not." Something flickered across Colton's face. It might have been approval. "Good enough. Get boots and a coat. Move." Clara ran back inside, her bare feet slapping against the floorboards. Mrs. Chen intercepted her at the stairs with a pair of men's boots and a heavy canvas coat. "These'll be too big, but they'll keep you alive," the older woman said, shoving them at Clara. "Don't do anything stupid." Clara pulled on the boots. They were too big, but she laced them tight and shrugged into the coat. By the time she got back outside, Colton had her father's mare saddled and waiting. "Can you keep up?" he asked. "Try me." They rode out with 20 men into a dawn that smelled like smoke. The north pasture was 3 miles from the main house, and Clara could see the glow of the fire long before they reached it. Orange light painted the sky, and the wind carried ash and the sound of cattle screaming. When they crested the ridge, Clara saw the full scope of the disaster. Fire had torn through nearly 40 acres of grassland, racing west on the wind. Flames jumped from one patch of dry winter grass to the next, eating everything in their path. Cattle were running in blind panic, some with their hides already singed. And beyond the fire line, Clara could see what Victor had meant about this being deliberate. The burn pattern was wrong. 3 separate ignition points, all upwind, all positioned to drive the fire straight toward Mercer buildings and livestock. This was an accident. This was attack. Jesus Christ, someone muttered. Save it, Victor snapped. He was already dividing the men into teams. Jake, take 10 men and get the cattle out. Drive them east, away from the flames. Carlos, you and your crew start a fire break along the southern ridge. If it jumps that line, we lose the whole valley. Colton, I'll take the north flank, Colton said. Try to contain it before it reaches the tree line. Take the girl with you. Keep her alive. It wasn't a request. Victor spurred his horse toward the flames, shouting orders, and the men scattered to their assignments. Clara followed Colton down the ridge at a hard gallop, the mare's hooves pounding against frozen ground. They hit the fire line at the north edge where the flames were thinnest. Men were already there with shovels and wet blankets, beating at the fire, trying to smother it before it could spread. The heat was enormous. The smoke burned Clara's throat and made her eyes water. Colton swung down from his horse and grabbed a shovel. Start throwing dirt on the edges. Don't let it jump the creek bed. Clara dismounted and found a shovel someone had dropped. The handle was hot even through her gloves. She started digging, throwing dirt onto flames that hissed and fought back, and within minutes her shoulders were screaming and sweat was running down her back despite the freezing air. A man beside her stumbled, overcome by smoke. Clara grabbed his arm and dragged him back from the fire line, shoved him down, and took his position. The flames roared. The wind shifted. Somewhere behind them, cattle were still screaming. It's jumping, someone yelled. Clara looked up and saw a tongue of flame leap the creek bed and catch on dry brush 20 feet away. If it established itself there, the whole fire break would be useless. She ran for it without thinking. Clara! Colton's voice, sharp with warning, but Clara was already there, beating at the new flames with her shovel, smothering them with dirt and rage and desperation. The fire fought her. Sparks landed on her coat, on her hair. She smelled burning fabric. Didn't care. Just kept hitting the flames until they died, until there was nothing left but smoking ground and her own ragged breathing. Strong hands grabbed her and pulled her back. Colton, his face black with soot, his eyes furious. What the hell were you thinking? It was going to jump, Clara gasped. So let it jump. We have 20 men here, and none of them were close enough. Colton looked at her like she was insane. Maybe she was. Her hands were shaking and her coat was full of burn holes and she could feel blisters forming on her palms, even through the gloves. You could have died, Colton said. I didn't. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Claire's voice came out rougher than she intended. You brought me out here to help. I'm helping. Colton stared at her. Then he shook his head and shoved a wet blanket into her hands. Fine. Help. But if you die on your first day, my father will kill me. They worked for 3 more hours. The sun came up behind a curtain of smoke, turning the sky the color of old blood. The fire gradually died, beaten back by sheer stubbornness and backbreaking labor. By the time the last flames were smothered, Claire's entire body hurt, and her lungs felt like they'd been scoured with sand. She stood in the middle of scorched earth, surrounded by exhausted men, and watched Victor Mercer walk the burn line with a face like stone. 40 acres, he said finally. Could have been worse. Could have been better, someone muttered. Victor's head snapped toward the voice. You got something to say, Jackson? The man, Jackson, shifted uncomfortably. Just saying, boss. This is the 3rd fire in 2 months. Someone's trying to send a message. I know what message they're sending. Victor's voice was cold. And when I find out who's sending it, I'll send one back they won't forget. He turned and walked toward his horse. The men began gathering tools, loading wagons, preparing for the ride back. Clara bent to pick up her shovel and nearly fell over. Her legs were shaking. Colton appeared at her elbow. You all right? No? Can you ride? I'll manage. That's not what I asked. Clara looked at him. His face was as soot-stained as hers, his hair full of ash, his hands wrapped in bloody rags where blisters had burst. He looked like he'd been through a war. "Can you?" she asked. Colton's mouth twitched. "I'll manage." They rode back together in a group of men too tired to talk. The ranch yard was full of activity when they arrived, wagons being unloaded, horses being tended, Mrs. Chen moving among the men with water and food. Clara slid down from the mare and almost collapsed. Her legs wouldn't hold her. "Easy." Colton caught her arm. "When's the last time you ate?" Clara tried to remember. "Yesterday, last night." "Come on." He half carried her into the house and deposited her in a chair at the kitchen table. Mrs. Chen took one look at Clara's face and started assembling food without being asked. Bread, cold beef, eggs, coffee so strong it could strip paint. Clara ate like she was starving. Maybe she was. Colton sat across from her, eating with the same mechanical efficiency, and neither of them spoke until the food was gone. "Your hands," Mrs. Chen said. Clara looked down. Her gloves were burned through in places, and beneath them her palms were raw and blistered. She hadn't felt it while she was working, but now the pain came in waves that made her vision blur. Mrs. Chen produced a tin of salve and began treating the burns with hands that were surprisingly gentle. Clara gritted her teeth and didn't make a sound. "You did good work today," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I didn't do anything special. You stopped a fire from jumping a fire break. Jake saw the whole thing, said you moved faster than any man there." Mrs. Chen wrapped Clara's hands in clean bandages. "Mr. Victor won't say it, but that saved us hours of work." "Will he say anything?" "No, he's not the saying type." Clara flexed her bandaged hands carefully. "What about the fires?" "Jackson said this was the third one." Mrs. Chen's face closed down. "That's ranch business." "I'm on the ranch now." "Doesn't mean you need to know everything." Mrs. Chen stood, gathering the medical supplies. "Get some rest. You look half dead." She left. Clara sat at the table, staring at her wrapped hands, and tried to process the last 12 hours. Yesterday, she'd been fixing a fence on a dying ranch. Today, she'd fought a fire set by enemies she didn't know on land that didn't belong to her. And tomorrow, she was supposed to marry Colton Mercer. The thought hit her like cold water. In all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten. There was going to be a wedding, vows, a life she couldn't begin to imagine. "You're thinking too hard," Colton said. Clara looked up. He was still sitting across from her, watching with eyes that were too perceptive. "I don't know what I'm doing here," Clara said. "Neither do I." "That's not reassuring. It's honest." Colton leaned back in his chair. "You want reassurance, I can't give it. I don't know if this will work. Don't know if we'll kill each other or make something decent, but I know I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not, and you don't seem like the pretending type." "What type am I?" "The surviving type." His voice was matter-of-fact. "You've been surviving your whole life. Now you just have to survive this." Clara's throat tightened. "And if I can't, then we'll figure it out." Colton stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left her alone in the kitchen. Clara sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, before she finally dragged herself upstairs to the guest room. Her body was one massive ache. Her hands throbbed. She stripped off the burned coat and the soot-stained dress and collapsed into bed without washing. Sleep hit her like a hammer. She dreamed of fire, of her father's face twisted with rage, of riding through darkness towards something she couldn't name. When she woke, it was late afternoon, and someone was knocking on her door. "Miss Hale?" Mrs. Chen's voice. "You need to get up." Clara groaned and sat up. Her hands screamed in protest. "Why?" "Because there are people downstairs who want to meet you, and Mr. Victor says you're getting married at sunset, whether you're ready or not." The words took a moment to penetrate. Then Clara was out of bed, her heart racing. "What? Today?" "Today." Mrs. Chen opened the door, carrying an armful of fabric. "I've got a dress. It's not fancy, but it's clean. There's water for washing. You've got an hour." Clara stared at the dress, simple gray wool, well made, but plain. "Mrs. Chen, I can't." "Can't what?" "I don't know how to be a wife." Mrs. Chen set the dress on the bed and looked at Clara with something that might have been sympathy. Nobody does, girl. You learn as you go. Now wash up. You smell like smoke. The next hour passed in a blur. Clara washed, wincing when water hit her blistered hands. Mrs. Chen helped her into the dress, pinned up her hair, and handed her a pair of decent boots that almost fit. There was no mirror in the guest room, so Clara had no idea what she looked like. "Will I do?" she asked. Mrs. Chen studied her. "You'll do." They went downstairs together. The parlor was full of people Clara had never seen before. Ranch hands cleaned up and uncomfortable in their good clothes, a few women from neighboring ranches, an old man with a Bible who must be the preacher. And in the center of it all stood Victor Mercer, looking like a man preparing for a business transaction. Colton was beside him, wearing a clean shirt and a tie that looked like it was strangling him. His eyes found Clara across the room, and something passed between them, not love, but understanding. They were both trapped in this moment, both making the best of a situation neither had fully chosen. "There she is," Victor said. His voice carried across the room. "Clara Hale, or she will be Clara Mercer in about 5 minutes." The preacher stepped forward, Bible in hand. He was old and tired-looking, with the kind of face that had seen too many hard marriages and not enough happy ones. "Shall we begin?" he asked. Clara wanted to say no, wanted to run, wanted to wake up back in her old life where at least she knew what to expect. But Colton was holding out his hand, and Clara found herself walking toward him. And then they were standing together in front of the preacher while the old man droned through vows that Clara barely heard. "Do you, Colton Mercer, take this woman?" "I do," Colton said. "And do you, Clara Hale, take this man?" Clara looked at Colton, at the man who had chosen her for reasons she still didn't understand, at the life she'd jumped into with both eyes open and no safety net. "I do," she said. The preacher pronounced them married. Someone clapped. Colton leaned in and kissed her, quick and awkward and perfunctory. Then it was over, and Clara was a wife, and she had no idea what came next. The gathering broke up quickly. People offered congratulations that sounded hollow, shook hands, and dispersed. Within 20 minutes, the house was quiet again. Clara stood in the parlor, still in the gray dress, and tried to understand what had just happened. "Well," Victor said, "that's done." Colton shot his father a look. "Is that all you have to say?" "What do you want me to say? That I'm happy? I'm not. You chose a ranch hand over a dozen suitable women." Victor looked at Clara. "But you chose her, so now she's family, and family works." It wasn't a welcome. It was a job assignment. "Come with me," Victor said to Clara. "We need to talk." He led her to his office, a room lined with ledgers and maps and the accumulated records of an empire. He closed the door, poured himself a whiskey, and sat behind his desk like a king on a throne. "Sit down," he said. Clara sat. Victor studied her for a long moment. "You know why someone's burning my land?" "No. Because they want me to react, want me to ride out with guns and start a war. Then they can claim self-defense when they kill my men and take my water rights." His voice was flat. "It's a game, and it's been going on since before you were born. Who's behind it?" "Thomas Quinn. Owns the land west of here. Used to be friends with my father until they had a falling out over a woman and a water contract." Victor took a drink. "Now he wants to drive me out and take everything I've built." Clara thought about the fire, about the deliberate burn pattern. "So what are you going to do?" "Nothing." The answer surprised her. "Nothing? If I retaliate, I give him exactly what he wants, so I absorb the losses, rebuild, and wait for him to make a mistake." Victor leaned forward. "But that doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I'm patient." "You understand the difference?" "Yes." "Good. Because you're a Mercer now, and Mercers don't break. We bend, we wait, and when the time is right, we strike." His eyes were cold. "Can you do that?" Clara met his gaze. "I spent 21 years bending for people who thought I was worthless. I know how to wait." Victor smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then we'll get along fine. Now get out. I have work to do." Clara left the office and found Colton waiting in the hallway. He looked uncomfortable. "My father's a bastard," he said. "I noticed. He'll respect you if you prove yourself, but he won't make it easy." Nothing's been easy, Clara said. Why should this be? Colton's expression softened slightly. Come on, I'll show you the rest of the ranch. They spent the next hour walking the property. The barns, the bunkhouse, the cattle pens, the equipment sheds. Colton explained how the operation worked, who managed what, where the boundaries were. It was a lot of information, but Clara absorbed it like water on dry ground. She'd spent her whole life running a failing ranch. This was different only in scale. You'll have your own responsibilities, Colton said as they walked. The household accounts, managing supplies, overseeing the kitchen, that kind of thing. Clara stopped walking. Is that what you want? Me in the kitchen? I want you wherever you're useful. Then don't put me in the kitchen. I can do more than that. Colton turned to face her. Like what? I can work cattle, break horses, manage men if they'll listen. Clara gestured toward the burned pasture in the distance. I can fight fires. I can do anything you'd ask a ranch hand to do. You're not a ranch hand. You're my wife. Can I be both? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He studied her face, looking for something. Deception, maybe, or pretense. But Clara had never been good at either. All right, Colton said finally. You want to work? You work. But you'll answer to me. And if my father gives you an order, you follow it. No arguments. I can't promise no arguments. Then promise you'll try. Clara considered it. I can promise that. Good enough. Colton started walking again. There's one more thing. We're married now, which means certain expectations. Clara's stomach tightened. She'd been trying not to think about this part, about what happened at night, about what being a wife actually meant. I won't force anything, Colton said, his voice careful. If you need time, take it. I'm not in a rush. The relief was so intense Clara almost laughed. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's basic decency. Colton looked at her. We barely know each other. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. They walked back to the house in silence. Mrs. Chen had dinner waiting. Roast beef, potatoes, bread that was still warm from the oven. Victor joined them at the table, and the three of them ate without much conversation. Clara was too tired to make small talk, and the men seemed equally exhausted. After dinner, Colton showed Clara to a different room, larger than the guest room, with a bed big enough for 2 people and windows that overlooked the valley. Their room, she realized. Their shared space. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, Colton said. Give you time to settle. You don't have to. I know, but I'm going to anyway. He paused in the doorway. You did good today. With the fire, my father won't say it, but you earned respect. From who? From the men. They're talking about how you stopped the fire from jumping, about how you didn't quit even when you were dead on your feet. Colton's voice was quiet. That matters here. More than being pretty or polite, or any of the things your family probably told you were important. Clara's throat tightened. They told me I wasn't important at all. Then they were wrong. Colton looked at her with something that might have been understanding. Get some rest. Tomorrow the real work starts. He left, closing the door behind him. Clara stood alone in the big room, in the big house, on the big ranch, and tried to understand what her life had become. 2 days ago, she'd been nobody. Now she was Clara Mercer, wife to a man she barely knew, daughter-in-law to a ruthless empire builder, living in the middle of a range war she didn't understand. And the strangest part was that she didn't want to go back. She missed nothing about her old life except maybe the simplicity of knowing exactly how miserable she was going to be. Here, she had no idea what came next, but at least she wasn't invisible anymore. Clara changed into a nightgown Mrs. Chen had left, climbed into the enormous bed, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the ranch settling for the night, cattle lowing, horses moving in their stalls, men's voices calling final instructions before sleep. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt something close to anticipation. Tomorrow, Colton had said, the real work would start. Clara didn't know what that meant, didn't know what she was capable of or what this place would demand from her. But she was done being the daughter nobody wanted. Now she was going to find out what kind of woman she actually was. And if that meant fighting fires and facing down men who thought she didn't belong, and learning to survive in a world that had no use for weakness, then that's what she'd do. Because Clara Mercer, and the name still felt strange in her mind, had spent her whole life proving herself to people who would never see her worth. Now she was going to prove it to herself instead. The wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Clara closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she slept without dreaming of everything she'd lost. She woke to find the bed empty and the sun already high. Clara sat up, disoriented, her body screaming in protest. Every muscle hurt. Her hands were still bandaged and throbbing. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and then it all came flooding back. The fire, the wedding, Victor's cold assessment in his office. She was married. She was a Mercer. And judging by the light streaming through the windows, she'd slept half the day away. Clara dressed quickly, fumbling with buttons because of her wrapped hands, and went downstairs. The house was quiet. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen kneading bread, and she looked up when Clara appeared. "Well, you're alive," the older woman said. "Barely. Where is everyone?" "Working. Where else would they be?" Mrs. Chen gestured to a plate of food keeping warm on the stove. "Eat. Then Mr. Colton wants you at the north barn." Clara ate standing up, too hungry to care about manners, then headed outside. The ranch yard was busy with mid-morning activity. Men repairing fences, shoeing horses, hauling hay. Several of them glanced at her as she passed, and Clara couldn't read their expressions. Curiosity, maybe. Or judgment. She found Colton at the north barn with 3 horses tied outside, all of them nervous and wall-eyed. He was talking to a ranch hand, an older man with a weathered face and hands like tree roots. "Won't let anyone near her," the man was saying. "Bit Jackson yesterday and nearly kicked Carlos through the fence." "How long have you been trying?" Colton asked. 3 weeks. "She's too wild, boss. Should probably just sell her." Colton saw Clara approaching and something shifted in his expression. "Maybe. Or maybe she just needs someone who understands stubborn." The ranch hand followed his gaze and saw Clara. His eyebrows went up. "You're not serious." "Why not? My wife's been breaking horses since she could walk. Isn't that right, Clara?" Clara stopped beside them and looked at the horses. 2 geldings, calm enough, and 1 mare, a beautiful chestnut with a white blaze and eyes full of rage. The mare's ears were flat against her head, and she was pulling against the lead rope hard enough to make the post creak. "That's the problem horse?" Clara asked. "That's Duchess," the ranch hand said. "Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as fast." Clara walked slowly toward the mare, hands loose at her sides. Duchess's eyes rolled white and she tried to rear, but the rope held her. Clara stopped just out of kicking range and stood there, not moving, just watching. "What are you doing?" the ranch hand asked. "Letting her see me." Clara kept her voice low and even. "She's scared, not mean. She damn near killed Jackson." Because Jackson probably walked up to her like he owned her. Horses don't like being owned, they like being understood. Clara took another step forward. The mare snorted and stamped, but didn't try to kick. "Easy, girl. Nobody's going to hurt you." She moved closer, inch by inch, talking in that same low voice. The mare's ears flickered forward, then back. Forward again. Clara could see the scars on her flanks, old marks from spurs or a whip. Someone had beaten this horse and broken her trust, and now she fought everyone who came near. Clara knew exactly how that felt. "Let me work with her," she said, not taking her eyes off the mare. The ranch hand looked at Colton. "Boss, if she gets hurt, then she gets hurt." Colton's voice was flat. "Clara, you want to try? Try. But if that horse puts you in the dirt, don't expect sympathy." Clara almost smiled. "I never do." She spent the next 2 hours in the round pen with Duchess, while Colton and the ranch hand watched from the fence. The mare fought her at every turn, rearing, bucking, trying to bite. But Clara had learned patience on her father's ranch, where they couldn't afford to waste a horse, where every animal had to earn its keep no matter how difficult. She didn't force anything, didn't use a whip or spurs, just kept moving the mare in circles, changing direction, making her work until the fight started draining out of her. And slowly, so slowly Clara's arms were shaking and her bandaged hands were bleeding through the wrappings. The mare's ears came forward and stayed there. By noon, Clara had a halter on her. By mid-afternoon, she was running her hands along the mare's neck and flanks. By evening, when the sun was dropping toward the mountains and turning the sky orange, Clara led Duchess out of the round pen without a rope. The ranch hand's mouth fell open. "I'll be damned." "She's not broken," Clara said, stroking the mare's nose. But she'll work if you don't push her. Give her to someone patient, someone who won't hit her. Give her to you. What? She's yours. You earned her. Colton pushed off the fence and walked over to where Carlos was waiting with fresh horses. Come on, we need to check the western boundary before dark. Clara handed Duchess's lead to the ranch hand and followed Colton to the horses. Her whole body hurt and her hands were on fire, but she swung up onto the mare she'd ridden from her father's ranch without complaint. They rode out together, just the two of them, into the long shadows of late afternoon. The land rolled out around them in waves of brown grass and scattered timber, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. Clara could see why men fought over this territory, why they burned and killed and bled for the right to call it theirs. You did good today, Colton said after a while. You keep saying that. Because you keep earning it. He glanced at her. Jake told half the ranch about you stopping the fire from jumping. Now they're calling you the stubborn one. Is that a compliment? Out here? Yes. They rode in silence for a while, following the fence line west. The sun dropped lower, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Clara tried to imagine what her family would think if they could see her now, married to a mercer, riding across land her father would never own, earning respect from men who would have laughed at her a week ago. She hoped her father was choking on his pride. There, Colton said suddenly. Clara followed his gaze and saw it. Another section of fence cut deliberately, the wire pulled back and left hanging. Fresh tracks led through the gap, cattle tracks heading west onto Quinland. How many head do you think? Clara asked. 20, maybe 30, enough to make a point. Colton dismounted and examined the cut wire. This was done last night. Professional job. Someone who knows what they're doing. Quinn's men? Probably. Colton straightened, his jaw tight. This is how it works. They burn us, we lose cattle. They steal cattle, we lose money. They keep pushing until we push back, and then they claim we started the war. So what do we do? Colton looked at her for a long moment. We fix the fence and report the loss. Same as always. That's it? That's what my father says to do. Absorb the losses. Don't give them an excuse. Colton's voice was bitter. Even if it means we bleed slowly instead of fighting back. Clara heard the frustration underneath, the anger he was holding in check. She understood it. Understood the rage that came from being told to stay quiet while someone hurt you, to take the punishment without fighting back. She'd lived that way for 21 years. Your father's smart, Clara said carefully, but that doesn't mean he's right. Colton looked at her sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a difference between avoiding a war and letting someone walk all over you, and I'm saying that if you never push back, they'll never stop pushing. You've been here 3 days. You don't know how things work. I know how bullies work, and Quinn sounds like a bully. Clara met his eyes. My father was a bully. He hit me once when I was 14, and I hit him back hard enough to break his nose. He never touched me again. Colton stared at her. You broke your father's nose? He deserved it. Something that might have been admiration flickered across Colton's face. My father would kill me if I started a range war over stolen cattle. I'm not saying start a war. I'm saying stop bleeding. Clara gestured to the cut fence. How much land have you lost to fires? How many cattle to theft? How much money? Too much. And how much is too much before you decide enough is enough? Colton didn't answer. He just stood there in the fading light, looking at the cut wire and the tracks leading west, and Clara could see the war happening inside him, between what his father demanded and what his own instincts were screaming. We should get back, he said finally. It's getting dark. They rode back to the ranch in silence. The stars were coming out by the time they reached the barn, and Carlos took their horses without comment. Clara's hands were bleeding again, and she was so tired she could barely stand. Mrs. Chen took one look at her and pointed toward the stairs. Bed. Now. I need to eat. I'll bring something up. Go. Clara went. She made it to the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed, still wearing her boots. Her hands throbbed. Her shoulders burned. But underneath the pain was something else, something that felt almost like satisfaction. She'd worked. She'd earned respect. She'd proven she could handle herself, and tomorrow she'd do it again. Mrs. Chen appeared with a tray of food and fresh bandages. She unwrapped Clara's hands, tisked at the damage, and applied more salve with fingers that were surprisingly gentle. You're going to cripple yourself if you keep this up, the older woman said, My hands have been worse. That doesn't make it smart. Mrs. Chen wrapped the bandages tight. You're trying too hard, trying to prove something. Maybe. To who? The men? Mr. Victor? Yourself? Clara didn't answer. She didn't know how to explain that she'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough. And now she finally had a chance to be more than that. And she couldn't stop pushing because stopping felt like giving up. Mrs. Chen sighed. Eat, then sleep. And tomorrow, try to remember you're human. She left Clara alone with the food. Clara ate mechanically, then stripped down to her underclothes and crawled under the covers. The bed was too big, too empty, but she was too exhausted to care. Sleep came fast and hard, dragging her under into dreams of fire and horses, and her father's face twisted with rage. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder. Clara, wake up. Colton's voice urgent in the darkness. Clara sat up, heart hammering. What's wrong? Get dressed. Now. There's trouble. She dressed in the dark, her stiff fingers fumbling with buttons. Colton was already at the door, and Clara followed him down the stairs and outside into a night that smelled like smoke and fear. The ranch yard was full of men and horses. Victor stood in the center giving orders, his face hard in the lamplight. When he saw Colton and Clara, his expression turned colder. About time, he snapped. Quinn's men hit the south pasture an hour ago, burned another 20 acres and drove off 50 head of cattle. They left a message. He handed Colton a piece of paper. Even in the dim light, Clara could read it. Next time we burn the house. Colton's jaw went tight. Where are they now? Headed back west, Jake tracked them to the boundary line. Victor looked at his son. This is different. This is a direct threat. We need to respond. Respond how? Ride to Quinn's ranch. Confront him directly. Make it clear that if he comes after my family, I'll burn his world to the ground. The words hung in the air like smoke. Clara saw the men watching, waiting to see what Colton would say. Saw the test underneath Victor's order. Would his son be strong enough to lead when the time came, or would he fold? We need proof it was Quinn, Colton said carefully. We have proof. His men were seen leaving the pasture. Seen by who? Jake, and 2 other hands. In the dark? From a distance? That's not proof, that's suspicion. Colton's voice was steady. If we ride to Quinn's ranch with guns and accusations, we're starting the war he wants. We're giving him exactly what he's been pushing for. Victor's face flushed dark red. So we do nothing? Let him threaten to burn our home and just take it? I didn't say do nothing. I said we need to be smart. Smart? Victor's voice dripped with contempt. Your grandfather built this ranch with blood and bullets. Your great-grandfather fought off claim jumpers and rustlers with nothing but a rifle and the will to use it. And you want to be smart. Yes, Colton said. Because times have changed. You can't just shoot everyone who crosses you anymore. The hell I can't. Clara saw Colton's hands clench, saw the rage he was keeping locked down, the frustration of a man caught between what was expected and what was right. And she saw the moment when Victor decided his son was too weak to handle this. Fine, Victor said coldly. You stay here and be smart. I'll take care of this myself. He turned toward his horse. The men started moving, following his lead, and Clara saw what was about to happen. Victor riding to Quinn's ranch with armed men, turning suspicion into confrontation, starting the war that would burn through the territory like wildfire. Wait, Clara said. Every head turned toward her. Victor stopped walking and looked back with eyes like ice. What? Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she made herself speak. What if it wasn't Quinn? The question landed like a stone in still water. Victor's expression went dangerous. What are you talking about? What if someone else is setting these fires and stealing cattle and leaving messages to make you think it's Quinn? Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. What if they want you to ride to Quinn's ranch with guns? Want you to start a war that destroys both of you? That's ridiculous. Is it? You said yourself Quinn's been your enemy for years. If he wanted you dead, why would he leave messages? Why not just shoot you and be done with it? Clara took a step forward. Think about it. The fires are always small enough to contain. The cattle theft is always just enough to hurt, but not cripple you. The message tonight is a threat, but it's not specific. It's designed to make you angry, to make you react. Victor stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're telling me this is some kind of conspiracy? That doesn't make sense. And before you ride into a fight, maybe you should figure out who you're actually fighting. Silence. The men shifted uncomfortably. Victor's face was unreadable, and Clara knew she'd just crossed a line wives weren't supposed to cross, especially not wives who'd been married for less than a week. Get back in the house, Victor said quietly. Father, Colton started. I said get back in the house. Victor's voice cracked like a whip. You're my son's wife, not his advisor. You don't get a say in ranch business. Clara felt the dismissal like a slap, felt every man in that yard looking at her and judging her and finding her presumptuous. But she'd spent 21 years being told to shut up and stay small, and she was done with that. You're right, Clara said. I'm not an advisor. I'm nobody. Just a ranch hand's daughter who doesn't know anything about running an empire. Victor's eyes narrowed. Then why are you still talking? Because I've spent my whole life watching men make stupid decisions when they're angry. And this is a stupid decision. Clara met his gaze without flinching. You want to ride to Quinn's ranch and start a war? Go ahead. But if I'm right and someone else is pulling the strings, you'll be doing exactly what they want. And your empire will burn while you're busy fighting the wrong enemy. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Victor took a step toward her, and Clara saw Colton tense beside her, ready to intervene. But Victor didn't hit her. He just looked at her with something that might have been curiosity. You've got spine, he said quietly. I'll give you that. But spine without wisdom is just stupidity. Maybe, Clara said. Or maybe you're so used to fighting you can't see when you're being played. Victor's jaw worked. Then he turned to Colton. Control your wife. She's right, Colton said. The words hung in the air like thunder. Victor went very still. What did you say? I said she's right. This doesn't add up. Quinn's a bastard, but he's not stupid. If he wanted a war, he'd have started it years ago. Colton's voice was firm. Someone else is behind this. And before we do anything, we need to find out who. Victor looked between his son and Clara, his face hard. How do you propose we do that? Give me 3 days, Colton said. Let me ride the territory, talk to people, see what I can find out. If I don't have answers by then, we'll do it your way. 3 days. 3 days. Victor was silent for a long time. Then he nodded once, sharp and angry. Fine. 3 days. But if you don't find anything, we ride to Quinn's ranch and settle this the old way. Understood? Understood. Victor turned and stalked toward the house, barking orders as he went. The men dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves. Clara stood in the yard feeling like she'd just fought a battle she hadn't quite won. Colton looked at her. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. He could have hit you. So could my father. Didn't stop me from talking then either. Clara's hands were shaking, adrenaline draining out of her system. Do you really think I'm right? About someone else being behind this? I don't know. But your logic makes sense. Colton ran a hand through his hair. The question is who would benefit from a war between Quinn and my father? Someone who wants both your lands, Clara said. Someone who's been waiting for you to destroy each other so they can move in and take the pieces. Colton looked at her with something like respect. You've been here less than a week, and you're already thinking like a rancher. I've been thinking like this my whole life. I just never had anyone who'd listen. They stood there in the dark, and Clara realized this was the longest conversation they'd had since the wedding. They were still strangers in most ways, still learning how to exist in the same space. But there was something building between them. Not love exactly. More like partnership. Like maybe they could make this work if they both tried hard enough. Get some sleep, Colton said. Tomorrow we start asking questions, and I'm going to need your help. Why? Because you see things I don't, and because my father will never expect me to bring my wife along on ranch business. Colton's mouth quirked. Which makes you the perfect cover. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. Like Colton was finally seeing what she'd always known about herself. That she was more than just a body to fill a role. All right, Clara said. Where do we start? With the neighbors. Someone's seen something, even if they don't know they have. Colton started toward the house. We'll ride out at dawn. Clara followed him inside and up to their bedroom. Her hands throbbed and her whole body ached, but underneath the pain was something else. A sense of purpose she hadn't felt since leaving her father's ranch. She was done being invisible, done being dismissed, done letting other people decide what she was worth. Now she was going to prove that the stubborn daughter who nobody wanted was exactly the kind of woman this territory needed. And if that meant standing up to Victor Mercer, facing down whoever was trying to destroy his empire, and fighting battles she had no business fighting, well, she'd been doing that her whole life. This was just the first time anyone had given her permission to win. They rode out before sunrise with no explanation to Victor about where they were going or why. Clara sat astride Duchess. The chestnut mare was still skittish but learning to trust, and followed Colton east toward the Murphy ranch. The land was gray and cold in the pre-dawn light, and their breath came out in clouds. Clara's hands ached inside their bandages, but she'd wrapped them tighter this morning and ignored the pain. "The Murphys have been neighbors for 30 years, Colton said as they rode. "Good people. They run cattle on the land between us and Quinn. If someone's moving through the territory causing trouble, John Murphy would have seen something." "And he'll talk to you?" "He'll talk to my father's son. Whether he'll tell me the truth is another question." Colton glanced at her. "That's where you come in." "How?" "Men like Murphy don't trust Victor Mercer. They think he's ruthless and power-hungry, and they're not wrong. But they might trust you." Clara almost laughed. "Why would they trust me? I'm a Mercer now, too." "You're a Mercer who used to be a ranch hand's daughter. You know what it's like to work land that's trying to kill you. That matters to people like the Murphys." Colton's voice was thoughtful. "My father forgets that not everyone sees strength the way he does. Sometimes weakness is more honest." The words hit harder than Clara expected. She'd spent her whole life being called weak. By her father, by Vivian, by everyone who saw her calloused hands and dirt-stained clothes and decided she was less than. But Colton was saying something different. He was saying weakness could be a kind of power. They reached the Murphy ranch just as the sun was breaking over the eastern hills. It was smaller than the Mercer spread, a single-story house, one barn, fences that needed repair. Chickens scattered as they rode into the yard, and a dog started barking. A man emerged from the barn carrying a bucket. He was maybe 50, broad-shouldered and weathered, with the kind of face that had seen too many hard winters. When he saw Colton, his expression went carefully neutral. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "didn't expect to see you out this way." Colton dismounted and offered his hand. "John, hope we're not interrupting." Murphy shook hands, but his eyes were wary. "Depends on what you want." "Just to talk. This is my wife, Clara." Murphy's gaze shifted to Clara, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, taking in her worn work clothes, her bandaged hands, the way she sat a horse like someone who'd been doing it all her life. She dismounted and walked over, not bothering to smile or curtsy or do any of the things a proper ranch wife would do. "Mr. Murphy," she said simply. "Ma'am." Murphy looked between them. "Your father know you're here?" "No," Colton said, "and I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention it." That got Murphy's attention. His eyebrows went up. "You running around behind Victor Mercer's back? That's dangerous business, son." "I know. That's why I'm doing it." Colton's voice was flat. "Can we talk inside?" Murphy considered it, then nodded. "Mary's making breakfast. You hungry?" They followed him into the house. It was clean but shabby, with furniture that had been mended too many times and floors that creaked with every step. A woman, Mary Murphy, looked up from the stove when they entered, surprise flashing across her weathered face. "John, who—" "Oh." She saw Colton and her expression closed down. "Mr. Mercer." "Mrs. Murphy, this is my wife, Clara." Mary's eyes went to Clara, taking her measure. Clara saw the same calculation she'd seen in Murphy's face, trying to figure out what kind of woman would marry into the Mercer family, whether she was like Victor or something else entirely. "Pleased to meet you," Mary said carefully. "Likewise," Clara said. "Something smells good." It was the right thing to say. Mary's expression softened slightly. "Just eggs and bacon. Nothing fancy. You're welcome to join us if you don't mind simple food." "I grew up on simple food," Clara said. "It's the only kind I trust." That got a small smile from Mary. She gestured to the table, and they all sat down while she served breakfast on mismatched plates. The food was plain but good, and Clara ate without pretense while the Murphys watched. "So," Murphy said finally, "what brings you here?" Colton set down his fork. Someone's been burning our land and stealing our cattle, leaving messages blaming Quinn. My father wants to ride to Quinn's ranch and start a war. Murphy's face went tight. And you don't? I think someone's playing us, making it look like Quinn so we'll destroy each other. Colton leaned forward. You're between us and Quinn. If someone's moving through the territory causing trouble, you'd see them. Have you? Murphy and his wife exchanged a glance. Clara saw the hesitation, the fear underneath. These were people caught in the middle of something they wanted no part of. John, Mary said quietly, tell them. Murphy rubbed his face. 3 weeks ago, I saw riders cutting through my north pasture at night. 6 men, maybe 7. They were heading west toward Quinn's land, but they weren't Quinn's men. How do you know? Colton asked. Because I know Quinn's crew. Been neighbors with them for 20 years. These men were different, better armed, better horses. And they were moving like they didn't want to be seen. Murphy's voice dropped. I followed them as far as the boundary line. They met up with someone, couldn't see who in the dark, and then they split up. Half went toward Quinn's ranch, half came back toward Mercerland. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Did you tell anyone? Who was I going to tell? Your father? Murphy looked at Colton. Victor Mercer doesn't take advice from small ranchers, and if I told Quinn, he'd think I was working with the Mercers, so I kept my mouth shut and hoped it would blow over. It's not blowing over, Colton said. It's getting worse. Last night they left a message threatening to burn our house. Mary made a small sound of distress. Murphy's jaw tightened. That's bad. That's why we're here. I need to know everything you've seen, every detail. Colton's voice was urgent. Because in 2 days, if I don't have answers, my father's going to war. And when he does, everyone in this territory is going to get caught in the crossfire. Murphy was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and went to a drawer in the kitchen, pulled out a piece of paper and brought it back to the table. I drew this, he said, unfolding it, after I saw those riders. Figured I should keep a record in case things went bad. It was a crude map of the territory. Mercerland to the east, Quinnland to the west, the Murphy Ranch in between. Murphy had marked several X's along the boundary lines. These are places I've seen activity, he said, pointing. Riders at night, fires that burn too clean to be accidents, cattle going missing and turning up on the wrong side of the fence. His finger moved to a spot north of the Murphy Ranch. And this is where I think they're based. What makes you say that? Clara asked. Because I rode up there 2 days ago and found tracks. Lots of them. Like a camp, but temporary. They'd cleaned it up pretty good, but you could still see where they'd had fires and horses. Murphy looked at Colton. Whoever's doing this, they're not amateurs. This is organized. Colton studied the map, his face grim. Show me where exactly. I need to see it myself. I'll take you, Murphy said, but not until after dark. If someone's watching, we don't want them knowing we're onto them. Clara saw the logic in it, but she also saw the problem. We don't have time to wait. Victor gave Colton 3 days. We've already used one. Then use the day to gather more information, Mary said. She was looking at Clara with an expression that was almost sympathetic. Talk to the other ranchers, see if anyone else has seen these riders. The more proof you have, the better chance you have of convincing Mr. Victor to hold off. It made sense. Clara looked at Colton, who nodded slowly. All right, he said. We'll spend the day asking questions. Tonight we ride north with you and see this camp. Agreed? Agreed, Murphy said. But be careful. If these men are as organized as I think they are, they'll be watching. They left the Murphy Ranch an hour later with the crude map tucked in Colton's coat and a list of 3 other ranchers who might have information. The sun was fully up now, turning the grassland gold, and Clara felt the weight of what they were trying to do settling on her shoulders. You think Murphy's telling the truth? She asked. About the riders? Yes. About everything else? Colton shrugged. Hard to say. People see what they want to see. But the camp bothers me. If someone's that organized, they're not just opportunistic thieves. They're planning something bigger. Exactly. They spent the rest of the day riding from ranch to ranch, talking to neighbors who eyed them with suspicion and gave careful, guarded answers. Clara quickly realized that Victor's reputation preceded them everywhere they went. People were afraid of him, and that fear made them reluctant to help his son. But Clara had an advantage Victor didn't. She knew what it was like to be powerless. She knew how to talk to people who felt stepped on, who'd spent their lives watching rich ranchers take what they wanted while the small operations struggled to survive. At the Harrison Ranch, when the wife wouldn't even let Colton pass the porch, Clara dismounted and walked up alone. "Mrs. Harrison," she said quietly, "I know you don't trust the Mercers. I wouldn't either if I were you. But I'm not asking you to trust them. I'm asking you to trust me." Mrs. Harrison, a thin woman with tired eyes, looked at Clara's bandaged hands and work-worn clothes. "Why should I? Because 2 weeks ago I was fixing fences on a failing ranch while my father got drunk and told me I was worthless. The only reason I'm a Mercer now is because Colton saw something in me that my own family never did." Clara's voice was steady. "I don't want a war any more than you do, and if there's information that could stop one, I need to know." Mrs. Harrison studied her face for a long moment. Then she glanced toward where Colton was waiting by the horses and lowered her voice. "3 nights ago, my husband saw men watering horses at our creek. They told him they worked for Quinn, but Sam didn't recognize any of them. And Quinn doesn't usually send men this far east." She hesitated. "Sam wanted to report it to your father-in-law, but I told him not to. Didn't want to get involved." "I understand," Clara said. "But you're already involved. We all are." Mrs. Harrison nodded slowly. "The men said they were heading north to check fence lines. But we don't have shared fence with Quinn up there. It didn't make sense." "North," Clara repeated, the same direction Murphy had indicated on his map. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. You might have just saved lives." By the time the sun was setting, they'd talked to 5 ranchers and heard similar stories. Riders who didn't quite fit, movements that didn't make sense, a pattern of activity all pointing north toward the high country where the 3 properties met. Colton was tight-lipped and tense as they rode back toward the Murphy ranch. Clara could see him processing the information, trying to put the pieces together. "Someone's running an operation out of the high country," he said finally, "using our feud with Quinn as cover, stealing from both of us, burning both of us, making sure we blame each other instead of looking for them." "Who would have the resources for that?" Clara asked. "I don't know. Someone with money, someone who knows the territory." Colton's jaw was tight. "Someone who wants both our ranches destroyed so they can move in and take the pieces." They reached the Murphy ranch just as full dark was falling. John Murphy was waiting with 3 horses saddled and a rifle across his saddle. "You ready?" he asked. "Ready?" Colton said. They rode north into country that got rougher with every mile. The grassland gave way to timber, and the timber gave way to rocky slopes where the horses had to pick their way carefully. Murphy led them along paths that were barely visible in the moonlight, and Clara had to trust that Duchess wouldn't step wrong and send them both tumbling into the darkness. After 2 hours, Murphy held up a hand and they stopped. He dismounted and gestured for them to do the same. "From here we walk," he said quietly. "The camp's another 1/4 mile up. We need to be quiet." They tied the horses and moved forward on foot. The night was cold and full of sounds, wind in the trees, an owl calling, small animals moving through the brush. Clara's heart was hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Murphy led them up a ridge, and then down into a small valley sheltered by timber on 3 sides. He stopped behind a fallen log and pointed. "There," he whispered. Clara looked and saw it, a clearing where the trees had been cut back, the stumps still relatively fresh. Signs of recent habitation were everywhere, fire pits carefully covered, flattened grass where tents had stood, ruts from wagon wheels. And most damning of all, a stack of supplies half hidden under a tarp. Colton moved forward carefully, keeping low. Clara and Murphy followed. When they reached the tarp, Colton pulled it back and Clara saw what was underneath. Barrels of kerosene, coils of rope, fence wire, and a wooden crate with the lid pried open, revealing something that made Clara's blood run cold. Dynamite. "Jesus," Murphy breathed. Colton was staring at the dynamite like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. "This isn't cattle theft. This is war," Clara finished. "They're planning to blow something up." "But what?" Colton looked around the camp, his face pale in the moonlight. What target would need this much explosive? Clara thought about the geography, about the 3 ranches that met in this area, about what would cause the most damage and chaos. And then it hit her. "The dam," she said. Both men turned to look at her. "What dam?" Murphy asked. "The one on the north boundary, the one that feeds water to all 3 properties." Clara's mind was racing. If someone blows that dam, the water stops. Crops die. Cattle die. Colton's face went white. My father built that dam 15 years ago. Spent a fortune on it. If it goes, we're all finished, Murphy said quietly. Quinn, your father, me, everyone downstream. They stood there in the darkness, staring at enough explosives to destroy everything their families had built. And Clara felt the full weight of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just a range war brewing. This was systematic destruction planned by someone with resources and patience and no conscience at all. We need to tell your father, Murphy said. Right now. He won't believe it, Colton said, not without proof. And even if he does, he'll ride straight to Quinn's ranch and accuse him. This looks like something Quinn would do, hiring men to blow our shared water supply so he can buy our land cheap. But it's not Quinn, Clara said. Is it? Colton shook his head slowly. I don't think so. Quinn's a bastard, but he's not subtle. This is too calculated, too patient. Then who? Murphy asked. Before anyone could answer, they heard it, the sound of horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast through the timber. Get down, Colton hissed. They dropped behind the fallen log just as riders burst into the clearing. Clara counted 6 men, all heavily armed, all moving with military precision. They dismounted and began checking the supplies, and one of them, a tall man with a scarred face, walked over to the dynamite crate. How much longer? One of the men asked. 2 more days, Scarface said. Quinn and Mercer should be at each other's throats by then. Once they start shooting, we move on the dam. By the time they realize what's happened, it'll be too late. And if they don't fight? They will. Men like Victor Mercer don't back down. And Thomas Quinn's too proud to admit he's being played. Scarface's voice was cold. Either way, we win. The ranches collapse, the bank forecloses, and our employer buys everything for a fraction of what it's worth. Who's the employer? Another man asked. Don't know. Don't care. We're getting paid either way. Scarface started giving orders about moving the supplies to a new location, and the men scattered to work. Clara looked at Colton. His face was stone hard, rage and shock warring for dominance. Murphy had his hand on his rifle, but Colton shook his head sharply. 6 armed men against 3, one of whom was a woman with bandaged hands. They'd be dead before they got off a shot. They waited in agonizing silence while the men loaded supplies onto horses and prepared to move out. It felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. Finally, the men mounted up and rode west, deeper into the high country. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Colton stood slowly. We need to get back, he said. Now. They ran for the horses. Clara's lungs were burning by the time they reached them, and her hands were screaming where she'd torn open the blisters climbing over rocks. But she hauled herself onto Duchess and followed Colton down the mountain at a pace that was barely short of reckless. Murphy split off at his ranch with promises to gather what help he could. Colton and Clara rode hard for Mercer land, and the sun was just breaking over the eastern hills when they galloped into the ranch yard. Victor was on the porch drinking coffee. When he saw them riding in hard and fast, his expression went dangerous. Where the hell have you been? Colton swung down from his horse. We found who's behind the fires. Quinn. Not Quinn. Someone else. Someone who's planning to blow the dam and destroy all 3 ranches so they can buy the land cheap. Colton's voice was hard. We saw their camp. We heard them talking. They have enough dynamite to level half the mountain, and they're moving in 2 days. Victor's face went very still. You're serious? Dead serious. Show me. They spent the next hour in Victor's office while Colton laid out everything they'd learned. The riders Murphy had seen, the camp in the high country, the conversation they'd overheard. Clara filled in details and Victor listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with every word. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. Do you know who's funding this? He asked finally. No, Colton said. But it's someone with serious money. Someone who knows the territory well enough to plan this. Someone who's been patient enough to wait for the perfect moment. Victor's eyes were cold. Only one man fits that description. Harold Brennan. The name meant nothing to Clara, but she saw Colton's face go white. The railroad man, he asked. The railroad man, Victor confirmed. He's been trying to buy right-of-way through this territory for 5 years. We've all refused to sell. But if our ranches collapse and the bank forecloses, he can buy the land at auction for pennies and run his rail line straight through to the mining territories. Clara felt sick. So he's been orchestrating this whole thing? The fires, the theft, the war between you and Quinn? It fits, Victor said. His voice was flat and cold. Brennan's got the money, the motivation, and the connections to hire men who do this kind of work, and he's ruthless enough not to care who gets hurt in the process. So what do we do? Colton asked. Victor stood and walked to the window, looking out over his land. We do exactly what Brennan doesn't expect. We make peace with Quinn. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Colton stared at his father. What? You heard me. We ride to Quinn's ranch, we tell him everything we know, and we form an alliance. Victor's voice was hard. Because if Brennan succeeds, we both lose. But if we work together, we can protect the dam and stop him. Quinn will never believe you, Clara said quietly. Victor looked at her. Then I'll make him believe. And you're coming with us. Why me? Because you figured this out when none of us could see past our own hatred. Because Thomas Quinn has daughters, and he might listen to a woman who understands what's at stake. Victor's eyes were calculating. And because if this goes wrong, you're the only one of us he might not shoot on sight. Clara wanted to argue, but she saw the logic, saw the terrible risk they were about to take, riding onto enemy land with accusations that sounded insane. But she also saw that it was the only chance they had. All right, she said, when do we leave? Now, Victor said, before Brennan's men move those supplies and we lose our proof. Colton, gather 10 men we can trust. Armed but not looking for a fight. We ride in 1 hour. Colton left to make preparations. Clara stood there with Victor, and the old man looked at her with something that might have been respect. You've been here less than 2 weeks, he said, and you've already seen what I spent 30 years being too blind to notice. That this territory is worth more than pride. That some enemies are more dangerous than the ones you know. I learned that from my father, Clara said quietly. He taught me that sometimes the people who hate you the most are the ones closest to home. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Your father was a fool to throw you away. Yes, Clara said. He was. They rode out an hour later, Victor, Colton, Clara, and 10 armed ranch hands. The tension in the group was thick enough to cut. Everyone knew they were riding into danger, that Thomas Quinn could decide to shoot first and ask questions never. But they rode anyway, because the alternative was watching everything burn. The Quinn Ranch came into view around noon. It was different from the Mercer spread. Older buildings, land that looked harder used, fences that needed work. But it was solid and well defended, and Clara saw men with rifles watching from the barn and the house as they approached. A man came out onto the porch. He was older than Victor, maybe 70, with white hair and a face carved by weather and anger. Thomas Quinn. Even from a distance, Clara could see the hatred in his eyes. Victor raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. He rode forward alone until he was 20 feet from the porch. Quinn, he said, I need to talk. Get off my land, Mercer. I will. After you hear what I have to say. Victor's voice was steady. We've both been played. Someone's been setting fires, stealing cattle, and leaving evidence to make us blame each other. And in 2 days, they're planning to blow the dam and destroy all of us. Quinn's face was stone. That's the stupidest story I've ever heard. It's the truth. My son found their camp in the high country. They have enough dynamite to level the mountain. Victor gestured to Colton. Tell him. Colton rode forward and laid out the same information they'd given Victor. Quinn listened without expression, his hand resting on the rifle across his lap. When Colton finished, Quinn was quiet for a long moment. Then he spat over the porch rail. Even if I believed you, which I don't, why would I trust a Mercer? Because you don't have a choice, Victor said flatly. If that dam goes, your land's worthless same as mine. And whoever's behind this will buy both our ranches at auction while we're too busy killing each other to notice. And you think it's Brennan. I know it's Brennan. He's the only one with enough money and motivation to pull this off. Quinn's eyes narrowed. You got proof? Not the kind that would hold up in court. But I've got a camp full of supplies, men we overheard talking, and 2 days before they make their move. Victor's voice was hard. You want to sit here and call me a liar while your ranch burns. That's your choice. But I came here offering alliance, and that's something I've never done before. So you better think hard about what that means." The two old men stared at each other across 20 feet of Montana dirt, 30 years of hatred hanging between them like fog. Clara held her breath, watching Quinn's face, trying to read whether he'd shoot or listen. Finally, Quinn lowered his rifle. "All right, Mercer," he said. "I'll hear you out. But if this is some kind of trick, I'll put a bullet in you myself." "Fair enough," Victor said. And just like that, the war that had been brewing for decades stopped before it started. Because sometimes the only way to survive was to trust the enemy you knew against the one you didn't. Quinn's ranch house smelled like coffee and old tobacco and 30 years of loneliness. Clara sat at the kitchen table between Victor and Colton while Thomas Quinn paced the floor like a caged animal. His daughters, 3 of them, all grown, watched from the doorway with expressions that ranged from suspicious to outright hostile. The oldest one, a woman maybe 30 with Quinn's same hard eyes, had her hand resting on a pistol at her hip. "Let me get this straight," Quinn said, his voice tight. "You're telling me that Harold Brennan, the railroad man, has been paying thugs to burn our land and steal our cattle so we'd kill each other and he could buy our ranches cheap?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Victor said. "And you expect me to believe this because your son and his brand new wife stumbled onto a camp in the high country?" "We didn't stumble," Colton said. "We went looking. We talked to every rancher between here and Murphy's place. They've all seen the same riders, the same patterns. Someone's been running an operation right under our noses." Quinn stopped pacing and looked at Clara. "What about you? You got anything to say?" Clara met his eyes without flinching. "I grew up on a failing ranch watching my father blame everyone else for his problems instead of looking at what was actually killing us. It was easier to be angry than to admit he was being played." She kept her voice steady. "You can call Victor Mercer a liar if you want. You can shoot us all and go back to waiting for the next fire. Or you can ride up to that camp with us and see the proof for yourself." Quinn's jaw worked. "You got a mouth on you, girl." "I've been told that before." One of Quinn's daughters, the middle one, younger than Clara with dark hair and her father's stubborn chin, stepped forward. "Pa, if there's even a chance they're telling the truth." "I know, Sarah." Quinn's voice was weary. "I know." He walked to the window and stared out at his land for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Brennan came to me 2 months ago, offered to buy a right-of-way through my north pasture, said he'd pay fair price, help me modernize, bring prosperity to the whole territory." Quinn's hands were fists at his sides. "I told him to go to hell. Said I'd die before I let a railroad cut through land my grandfather cleared with his bare hands." "He made me the same offer," Victor said. 3 months ago. I gave him the same answer." Quinn turned around. "And you think when we both said no, he decided to destroy us instead?" "I think he decided to let us destroy each other. Less blood on his hands that way." The room was quiet. Clara could feel the weight of decades pressing down on these 2 old men. All the fights they'd had, all the grudges they'd nursed, all the opportunities for peace they'd thrown away, because pride mattered more than survival. And now they had to choose whether to keep hating each other or face a threat neither could handle alone. "All right," Quinn said finally, "show me this camp. But we do it my way. My men, my guns. And if this turns out to be some kind of Mercer trick, I'll burn your ranch to the ground myself." "Fair enough," Victor said. They rode out 2 hours later, a combined force of 15 men from both ranches, armed and wary, eyeing each other like wolves forced to hunt together. Clara rode beside Colton while Victor and Quinn took the lead, and the tension in the group was thick enough to choke on. John Murphy met them at the boundary line with 3 of his own men. When he saw Mercer and Quinn riding together, his eyes went wide. "I didn't think I'd live to see this," Murphy said. "You almost didn't," Quinn growled. "This better not be a waste of my time." They rode north into the high country as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks. The land got rougher, the trail narrower, and Clara could feel Duchess getting nervous beneath her. The mare sensed something wrong, the way animals always knew when violence was coming. When they reached the ridge above the camp, Murphy held up his hand and they all dismounted. Victor sent 2 men forward to scout, and they came back 10 minutes later with grim faces. "Camp's still there," one of them reported. "Supplies have been moved, but there's fresh activity. Looks like 6, maybe 7 men down there right now." Victor and Quinn exchanged a look. For a moment, Clara thought they might start arguing about tactics, about who was in charge, about who had the right to give orders. But then Victor just nodded, and Quinn nodded back, and some unspoken understanding passed between them. They'd fought each other for 30 years. They knew how the other man thought. "We go in quiet," Victor said. "Surround them, cut off escape routes. No shooting unless they shoot first. We need at least one of them alive to testify about Brennan." "Agreed," Quinn said. "Sarah, you and the Mercer girl stay with the horses." "Like hell," Sarah Quinn said. "Sarah, I can shoot better than half your men, Pa. You know it, and I know it. I'm going." Quinn looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara saw the moment he decided it wasn't worth it. He just grunted and turned away, which Sarah apparently took as permission. Clara caught Colton's eye. He shook his head slightly, a warning to stay back, to stay safe. But Clara had stopped taking orders about her own safety the day she left her father's ranch. She checked the rifle Murphy had loaned her and fell in beside Sarah Quinn. "You always this stubborn?" Sarah asked quietly. "Always," Clara said. "Good. Stubborn keeps you alive out here." They moved down the ridge in two groups, Mercer men circling east, Quinn men going west. Clara stayed with the eastern group, moving as quietly as she could through timber and rock. Her bandaged hands made it hard to grip the rifle, but she managed. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Clara could see the camp clearly. 6 men were loading supplies onto horses, working with the same military efficiency she'd seen before. One of them was Scarface, barking orders and checking weapons. Victor raised his hand, waited until Quinn's group was in position on the far side, then stepped into the clearing with his rifle leveled. "Nobody move," he shouted. The men froze. Then chaos erupted. One of them went for his gun and Victor shot him in the shoulder, dropping him. Another made a run for the horses and got tackled by 2 of Quinn's men. Scarface pulled a pistol and fired wild, and suddenly everyone was shooting and the clearing filled with gun smoke and screaming. Clara saw one of the hired guns break away from the fight and run straight toward where she was crouched behind a fallen log. He had a rifle and murder in his eyes, and he was coming fast. She stood up and fired. The shot caught him in the leg and he went down hard, his rifle flying. Clara worked the bolt and chambered another round, her hands shaking, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The man was trying to reach his weapon, and Clara stepped forward and kicked it away. "Don't move," she said. He looked up at her with eyes full of rage and pain. "You're making a mistake." "Probably, but I'm still the one with the gun." The fight was over in less than 3 minutes. 4 of the hired guns were dead or wounded. 2 had been captured. Scarface was on his knees with blood running from his mouth and Quinn's oldest daughter holding a rifle to his head. Victor walked over to where Scarface knelt and looked down at him with a face like stone. "Who hired you?" Victor asked. Scarface spat blood. "Go to hell." Quinn stepped up beside Victor. "You're going to tell us who's paying you, or we're going to leave you tied to a tree for the wolves. Your choice." "You can't prove anything. We're just hired hands doing a job. We've got your camp. We've got your dynamite. We've got witnesses who saw you talking about blowing the dam." Victor's voice was cold. "And we've got you. So you can talk now and maybe see the inside of a jail cell, or you can stay quiet and I'll save the territory the cost of a trial." Scarface looked between the 2 old ranchers and apparently decided they weren't bluffing. His shoulders sagged. "Brennan," he said. "Harold Brennan hired us 6 months ago. Paid us to make it look like you 2 were going to war. Said when the ranches collapsed, he'd buy the land and we'd get a bonus." "Where is he now?" Colton asked. "Don't know. He stays in town mostly. Sends messages through intermediaries." Scarface coughed, and more blood came up. "You think you've won something here? You haven't. Brennan's got lawyers and money and connections. He'll walk away clean, and you'll still lose everything." Victor's expression didn't change. "We'll see about that." They tied up the survivors and left 2 men to guard them while the rest of the group rode hard for the dam. The sun was setting by the time they reached it, a massive structure of timber and stone that held back a lake big enough to water 3 ranches and half a dozen smaller properties downstream. And buried at the base, right where the supports met the canyon wall, they found the explosives, enough dynamite to turn the whole structure into kindling. "Sweet mercy," Murphy breathed. Quinn's face had gone white. "How long would it have taken?" "Minutes," Colton said. He was examining the setup with hands that weren't quite steady. They timed it so the blast would hit at the weakest point. The whole thing would have come down in seconds. By the time anyone realized what happened, the water would be gone. "Can you disarm it?" Victor asked. "I think so, but I need light and time." Colton looked at his father. "And I need everyone back. If something goes wrong, then we all go together," Quinn said flatly. "Get to work, boy." Colton worked while the sun dropped below the mountains and the stars came out cold and bright. Clara held a lamp for him, watching his hands move carefully among wires and blasting caps, knowing that one wrong move would kill them all. The men stood in a wide circle, watching in tense silence. Mercer men and Quinn men standing shoulder to shoulder for the first time in 3 decades, united by something stronger than hatred, fear, and the understanding that some enemies were bigger than old grudges. It took Colton an hour to remove all the explosives and render them safe. When he finally stood up and nodded, Clara heard men release breaths they'd been holding. Someone actually laughed, high and nervous, the sound of tension breaking. "It's done," Colton said. Victor clapped his son on the shoulder, the first real affection Clara had seen him show. "Good work." Quinn was staring at the dam, his face unreadable. Brennan would have killed hundreds, destroyed every ranch in the valley. Also, he could run his railroad through cheaper land. "So what do we do about it?" Sarah Quinn asked. She was standing with her arms crossed, looking as angry as her father. "We can't prove he hired those men. He'll claim he had no knowledge of what they were doing." "We don't need to prove it in court," Victor said. His voice was quiet and dangerous. "We just need to make sure he understands what happens when you threaten a Mercer." "Or a Quinn," Thomas added. Clara saw where this was going and stepped forward before it could happen. "No." Every head turned toward her. Victor's eyebrows went up. "Excuse me?" "I said no. You can't just go kill Brennan. That makes you murderers and gives him exactly what he wants. Proof that ranchers are lawless savages who need to be controlled by civilization." Claire's voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. "You want to beat him? Beat him the right way." "And what way is that?" Quinn asked. "Make it public. Take those men we captured to the territorial marshal. Get them to testify about who hired them and what they were planning. Bring newspaper reporters. Make it so loud and public that Brennan can't hide behind his lawyers." Clara looked between the 2 old ranchers. "He wanted you to destroy each other quietly, so destroy him loudly instead." Victor and Quinn looked at each other. Clara could see them both fighting the urge to do it the old way, to ride into town with guns and settle this with blood. That's how their fathers would have done it. That's how they'd been taught. But times had changed. "The girl's right," Murphy said quietly. "We do this with violence. We're no better than him. We do it legal. We prove that this territory doesn't need his kind of civilization." Quinn rubbed his face. "I hate that you're right, but you are." "Then we ride to town tomorrow," Victor said. "All of us. Mercer, Quinn, Murphy, every rancher in this valley. We bring those bastards to the marshal, and we tell our story loud enough that Brennan can't buy his way out of it." They camped at the dam that night, too tired to ride back in the dark, too wired to sleep much. The men built fires and cooked what food they had, and Clara sat between worlds watching Mercer and Quinn ranch hands share coffee and stories like they hadn't been ready to kill each other 2 days ago. Sarah Quinn sat down beside her, offering a tin cup of something that smelled like it could strip paint. "What is this?" Clara asked. "Whiskey, Pa's recipe. Drink it slow or it'll kill you." Clara took a sip and her eyes watered. "Your father trying to poison people?" "Only the weak ones." Sarah smiled slightly. "You did good today, with the shooting and the talking both." "I just said what needed saying. Most people don't. They let men like our fathers make all the decisions and then complain when everything goes to hell." Sarah looked toward where Victor and Quinn were sitting by the fire, talking in low voices. "Those 2 have been enemies my whole life. I never thought I'd see them working together." "Maybe they just needed a bigger enemy. Maybe. Or maybe they needed someone to show them there was another way." Sarah glanced at Clara. "That was you, in case you're wondering. Word is that you're the one who figured out this whole thing wasn't about them at all." Clara didn't know what to say to that. She'd just been trying to survive, to prove herself, to find a place in a world that didn't want women like her. "Your father's different from mine," Sarah said after a moment. "Thomas Quinn never would have married someone like you. He wanted his daughters to be ladies, soft and pretty and useless. She said it without bitterness, just fact. Your father-in-law at least had the sense to let you work. He didn't have a choice. His son made the decision. Even better. Sarah took a drink from her own cup. You picked the right Mercer anyway. Colton's got more spine than Victor ever gave him credit for. Clara looked across the camp to where Colton was checking the horses. As if he felt her watching, he looked up and their eyes met. He smiled, small and tired but real, and Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not love, exactly. Not yet. But the foundation for it. The understanding that they were building something together, something that might actually last if they both kept trying. The next morning, they rode into town like an army. 30 men from 3 ranches, armed and grim, with 2 captured criminals tied to horses, and a story that was going to shake the territory to its foundations. Clara rode beside Colton at the front of the column, and she could feel people stopping to stare as they passed. The territorial marshal's office was a small building on the main street. The marshal himself, a tired-looking man named Wilson, who'd clearly given up on maintaining order years ago, came out onto the porch looking alarmed. "What's all this?" he demanded. Victor dismounted. "We're here to report a crime. Multiple crimes, actually. Arson, theft, attempted murder, conspiracy to destroy property, and whatever the legal term is for trying to blow up a dam that feeds water to half the territory." Wilson blinked. "What?" "You heard me. These men," Victor gestured to the prisoners, "were hired by Harold Brennan to start a war between the Mercer and Quinn ranches. When that didn't work fast enough, they planned to destroy the dam and make it look like we'd done it to each other. We have witnesses. We have evidence. And we have their confession." Wilson looked overwhelmed. "Mr. Mercer, I can't just—" "You can and you will. Because if you don't, I'll take this story to every newspaper from here to Denver, and by the time I'm done, everyone will know that the territorial marshal was too scared of railroad money to do his job." Victor's voice was cold. "Your choice, Marshal Wilson." Wilson swallowed hard. "I'll need statements from everyone." "You'll get them." They spent the next 6 hours in that cramped office while Wilson took statements from witnesses, examined evidence, and tried to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. Clara told her story 3 times, how she'd suspected something didn't add up, how they'd tracked the operation, how they'd found the explosives at the dam. By noon, word had spread through town. People gathered in the street, whispering. A reporter from the Helena newspaper showed up asking questions, and Victor talked to him for an hour straight, laying out the whole conspiracy in detail. And then Harold Brennan himself arrived. He came in a fancy carriage with 2 lawyers and the kind of confidence that came from never facing consequences. He was a tall man, maybe 50, with silver hair and expensive clothes, and eyes that calculated the value of everything they saw. "Marshal Wilson," he said smoothly, "I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding involving my name." "No misunderstanding," Victor said. "Just your hired men confessing that you paid them to destroy our ranches." Brennan's expression didn't change. "I have no knowledge of any such thing. If someone used my name to hire criminals, that's certainly unfortunate, but hardly my responsibility." "We have witnesses," Quinn growled. "You have the testimony of criminals trying to save their own skins." Brennan's voice was calm. "Any lawyer worth his salt would shred that in court. Now I suggest we all calm down and discuss this like civilized people. I'm prepared to offer compensation for your losses." "We don't want your money," Clara said. Everyone turned to look at her. Brennan's eyes focused on her for the first time, assessing and dismissing her in the same glance. "And who are you, young lady?" "Clara Mercer, and I'm the one who figured out what you were doing." Clara kept her voice steady. "You're right that testimony from criminals might not hold up in court, but we also have evidence. Dynamite with serial numbers that can be traced, supply manifests, payment records in the camp, and we have this." She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, one of the documents they'd found at the camp, a contract bearing Brennan's signature authorizing the purchase of supplies for railroad security operations in Montana Territory. Brennan's face went very still. "That proves nothing," one of his lawyers said quickly. "Maybe not by itself," Clara agreed. "But combined with everything else? Combined with a newspaper reporter who's going to write about how a railroad baron tried to start a range war so he could buy land cheap? Combined with every rancher in this territory standing together and telling the same story?" She met Brennan's eyes. You wanted us to destroy each other quietly. Instead, we're going to destroy you loudly. That office was absolute. Clara saw Brennan's mask slip for just a moment, saw the calculation behind his eyes, the understanding that he'd miscalculated badly. He'd thought ranchers were simple, violent, easy to manipulate. He'd been wrong. I'll fight this, Brennan said quietly. I have resources you can't imagine. So do we, Victor said. We have the truth, and we have each other. That's more than you've got. Brennan looked between Victor and Quinn, two men who'd hated each other for 30 years now, standing side by side, and Clara saw him understand that he'd already lost. He turned and walked out without another word. His lawyers scrambled to follow. Marshal Wilson sat down heavily in his chair. This is going to be a mess. Good, Quinn said. Let it be messy. Let everyone see what happens when someone tries to destroy honest people for profit. The case took 3 months to work through the territorial courts. Brennan's lawyers fought every step, but the evidence was overwhelming. The hired guns testified to save themselves from hanging. The supply manifests proved Brennan had purchased the explosives. And most damning of all, the newspaper coverage turned public opinion against him so thoroughly that even his political connections couldn't save him. In the end, Brennan didn't go to jail. Men with that much money rarely did. But his railroad plans were permanently blocked. His reputation was destroyed, and he left Montana Territory in disgrace with the promise that if he ever came back, he'd face charges. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was enough. By the time the case was settled, it was late summer, and the Montana grasslands were golden and full of life. Clara stood on the porch of the Mercer Ranch house, her house now, though it still felt strange to think of it that way, and watched the sun set over land that had almost been destroyed by greed and pride. Behind her, she heard the door open. Colton came out carrying 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. Victor wants to have dinner with the Quinns next week, he said. Talk about shared water management and coordinating on predator control. Clara almost laughed. Your father and Thomas Quinn having dinner together. Never thought I'd see that. Never thought I'd see a lot of things that have happened in the last 6 months. Colton leaned against the porch rail beside her. Never thought I'd marry a woman I'd known for 20 minutes. Never thought that woman would be the one to save my family's ranch. Never thought I'd actually be happy about any of it. Clara looked at him. They'd grown into their marriage slowly, carefully, like 2 people learning a new language together. They fought sometimes, about ranch management, about money, about his father's stubbornness, and her refusal to back down. But they also laughed, worked side by side, built something real in the space between them. You happy? She asked. Yeah, Colton said. I am. You? Clara thought about it. Thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, invisible, dismissed, certain she'd never be more than her father's disappointment. And then she thought about who she was now, a ranch owner, a partner, someone who'd helped stop a war and save a territory. Yeah, she said. I'm happy. They stood together in the fading light, and Clara let herself feel the truth of it. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough, and she'd believed it, had let it shape her, define her, limit her. But she'd been wrong. They'd all been wrong. She hadn't been the wrong daughter. She'd just been born into the wrong place, surrounded by people too blind to see what she was capable of. And the moment she'd chosen herself instead of fear, the moment she'd climbed onto Colton's horse and rode away from everything familiar, she'd changed not only her own destiny, but the future of everyone around her. A wagon came up the drive, and Clara recognized Sarah Quinn driving it. Beside her was Clara's sister Vivian. Clara had used Mercer money and influence to buy Vivian's freedom from the cruel marriage her father had forced her into. It had cost a fortune and required threats and negotiation and more stubbornness than Clara had known she possessed. But Vivian was free now, living in town and learning to be something other than beautiful and obedient. They were rebuilding their relationship slowly. It wasn't easy, too much hurt between them, too many years of being pitted against each other. But they were trying. Vivian climbed down from the wagon looking healthier than Clara had seen her in years. She'd cut her hair short and started wearing practical clothes, and there was something fierce in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Clara, Vivian said, Sarah convinced me to come see the ranch. I hope that's all right. It's fine, Clara said. It's good. They went inside together. The three of them, women who'd all learned in different ways that survival meant being stronger than anyone expected. Mrs. Chen had dinner ready, and they ate around the big kitchen table while Vivian told stories about the school she was planning to open for girls like them. Girls who'd been taught they were worthless. Girls who needed to learn they were anything but. "I want to call it the Hale School," Vivian said, "after our mother's maiden name, a place where daughters learn they're worth more than what their fathers think." Clara felt something tight in her chest ease. That's perfect. After dinner, Colton showed Vivian and Sarah around the ranch while Clara helped Mrs. Chen clean up. The older woman worked in comfortable silence for a while, then said, "You've done well, girl." "I got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought for yourself when no one else would. That's not luck. That's strength." Mrs. Chen dried her hands on her apron. "Your father was a fool." "I know." "Do you? Because you still act sometimes like you're trying to prove yourself, like you think if you work hard enough, people will finally see you're worth something." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle. "But you don't need to prove anything anymore. You already won." The words hit Clara harder than she expected. She stood there in the kitchen of a house she'd earned through stubbornness and courage, surrounded by people who respected her, married to a man who valued her, and realized Mrs. Chen was right. She'd spent so long fighting to be seen that she'd forgotten to notice when people started looking. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Clara stood at the bedroom window looking out over the darkened valley. Colton came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Clara said. "How different my life is now. How close we all came to destroying each other. How much had to go wrong before anything could go right." "You regret any of it?" Clara thought about her father's face when he'd thrown her out, about the nights she'd spent terrified that she'd made a terrible mistake, about the fire and the fear and the moment she'd stood between Victor and Quinn and convinced them to trust each other. "No," she said, "I don't regret any of it." Because the truth was that pain had taught her things comfort never could. Struggle had made her stronger than safety ever would. And being the daughter nobody wanted had forced her to become the woman everyone needed. She'd learned that enemies could become allies if the threat was big enough. That pride could be swallowed if survival demanded it. That sometimes the only way forward was to stand up and refuse to be pushed down anymore. She'd learned that she was enough. Not because anyone told her so, but because she'd proven it to herself in ways that couldn't be taken back. The Montana night was cold and clear, full of stars that had watched this territory for longer than any human conflict. Cattle lowed in the distance. Somewhere a coyote called. The wind carried the smell of grass and water and the promise of seasons still to come. And Clara Mercer, no longer the wrong daughter, no longer invisible, no longer afraid, stood in the house she'd helped save and felt something she'd never felt before. Peace. Not the kind that came from the absence of conflict. The kind that came from knowing you could survive anything because you already had. She'd been born into a world that didn't want her, raised by a father who couldn't see her worth, dismissed by a sister who'd been taught beauty was more valuable than strength. And she'd survived all of it. More than survived. She'd thrived, had taken every insult and turned it into fuel, had taken every rejection and used it to build something better. The forgotten daughter had become a legend, not the kind written in books, but the kind told in whispers around fires. The woman who stopped a war, who saw through conspiracy, who stood between powerful men and told them they were being fools. The woman who proved that sometimes the people everyone overlooks are exactly the ones who change everything. Clara turned in Colton's arms and kissed him, not with passion or desperation, but with the quiet certainty of someone who'd finally found where they belonged. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me when no one else did." Colton smiled. "I didn't do anything special. You were always there. I just looked." It was the truth, and they both knew it. Clara had always been strong, always been capable, always been more than what her family thought. She'd just needed someone to give her a chance to prove it. And now that she had, there was no going back. No returning to the girl who'd fixed fences on a dying ranch while her father told her she was worthless. No pretending she was less than she was to make other people comfortable. She was Clara Mercer now. Wife, rancher, peacemaker, survivor. And she was done apologizing for being exactly who she'd always been meant to be. Outside, the Montana night stretched on forever, full of possibility and promise, and all the tomorrows she'd fought daughter for the life her father wanted. But she was the right woman for the life she'd built, and that made all the difference.